I've gone over Facebook's year of scandals, Google and Amazon's struggles with ethics and abuses, and Apple's calls for privacy regulation. The last one has caused some pushback. What about Apple and Google search? What about Apple and China? What about Apple and cross-platform services? What about Apple and App Store app abuses? What about... You get the idea. And that's fine, that's great, that's exactly what I want. I said from the beginning that all of this, all of the videos I've done on privacy and security were meant to be parts of the conversation. So, let's converse. Welcome back, thank you so much for joining me. I'm Rene Ritchie, and this is Vector. If Apple is really all about privacy, then why is Google still the default search engine in Safari for macOS and iOS? Why not a service that respects search privacy like DuckDuckGo? Apple might tell you it's because Google gives the best results, and ultimately that's the trade-off that matters to most of their users most of the time. Others will point to Google paying Apple, according to some reports, high single-digit, approaching low double-digit billions with a B dollars for default search engine placement. Sure, you can go into settings and change the search engine from Google to DuckDuckGo or Yahoo or Bing, but the fact remains it's set to Google by default. And yeah, that resonates. If Apple really wants to completely lock down privacy on iOS and macOS, they'll need to plug that default leak in Safari, one way or another. As much as it's tempting to say Apple should just default to DuckDuckGo instead, Google, warts and harvesting and biases and all, really does still provide the best results. So, my preference would be this. The first time you launch Safari on a new Mac, iPhone, or iPad, or you do a big update, it asks you what you want to use as your default search engine, including Google, DuckDuckGo, and Bing. Yeah, Yahoo. Then people who care about privacy can choose DuckDuckGo and keep their personal search data personal. And people who don't care or simply find the data for services deal worth it can choose Google and just Google away. Apple also gets dinged for its willingness to follow Chinese law and host Chinese customer data in China on Chinese-owned servers. And that's also a totally valid concern. I've done a whole video on this already, so I'll link to it in the description. But too long, didn't watch, China has a long history of civil and human rights violations, and localizing data could allow it to be used against locals. But part of the pushback also smacks of ethnocentrism. Many governments and citizens of other countries feel just as concerned about their data being stored in the US and potentially subject to Snowden-style abuses by agencies and entities inside the US. I'm by no means falsing any equivalencies here. There is absolutely no comparison or correlation between the two governments and their respective track records. But it's critical to understand that China doesn't trust US tech companies with its citizens' data any more than the US trusts Huawei with American data, and we've all seen how that's been playing out recently. For Apple's part, the company insists that while the data has been moved to China in keeping with Chinese law, it's still encrypted and subject to the same privacy policies and key storage protocols as data stored in the US. And that means, at least for now, Chinese customers still get to enjoy the benefits of backup and recovery for all of their apps and media and the photos and videos of their kids and families, rather than being abandoned by Apple and left without those services. It's a tightrope walk to be sure, and one without a net, absolutely. So if and when the Chinese government does anything to violate that data, Apple will have to figure out how to handle it, and we'll have to see how Apple handles it. Apple is 100% security first when it comes to real-time data. Everything you send from one iOS device to another, or from an iOS device to iCloud, is end-to-end encrypted, and not accessible to anyone but you and the person you're sending it to. That's fail secure. But Apple has been criticized over how it handles backup. Those are encrypted during transit, but they're not entirely absolutely locked away in storage. If something goes wrong, Apple can help you recover that data. That's because it's not fail secure, it's fail safe. I've done a video explaining the difference between fail secure and fail safe before as well, link in the description. Basically, for some people, having their nudie pics and sexts leak is the worst possible thing that can happen. For others, having their family photos and tax information lost is the worst thing that can possibly happen. And balancing the two needs are tough. Apple originally erred on the side of security, but people who lost data got really upset. Now they're more in the middle, and privacy and security advocates are upset. There are rumors Apple has considered adding encryption to backups, which would increase security but also increase the potential for loss. My personal preference for backups would be fail-safe by default, but fail-secure as an option for people who care enough to go in, track it down, and set it. That adds significant architectural complexity, but ultimately I think it's the best solution for everyone in every geography going forward. There have been some suggestions that Apple should, for example, make iMessage and FaceTime for Windows and Android because encrypted communications for everyone is the moral and ethical thing to do. Adding hundreds of millions, if not potentially billions of new users to Apple's iMessage and FaceTime servers would be the dictionary definition of non-trivial. That's especially true for Apple, which has been knocked for both its services and its cross-platform apps for over a decade. Viable business models and technical acumen notwithstanding, because this would be for the moral imperative, right? I'm also not sure that singling out Apple and making them a target is the best for any of us. I'd argue it's better for everyone to apply loud, consistent, constant pressure to every major messaging network until they all enable end-to-end encryption by default. I mean, we're living in a world where Google, of all companies, has failed over and over again to create not only a thriving, but even a viable messaging and communications platform. And even when they do, their own needs to harvest our data seemingly prevent them from even thinking about making it encrypted by default. So I get it. I really get it. That said, if Apple could figure out a viable business model, or if iMessage and FaceTime became more valuable as services than incentives, I'd hope Apple would flip that cross-platform switch before it's too late. See BlackBerry, Messenger. An equal but opposite argument has been made that, rather than crossing platforms, Apple should shut them out. In other words, Apple should ban Facebook and Google from the App Store, so that those companies can no longer use iOS as a platform to harvest and exploit user data from iPhone and iPad customers. But unless Apple blacklists the Facebook and Google domains at the root level of the iOS internet stack, people who want those services on iPhone or iPad could still use Safari or a third-party browser wrapper to access them. That's even how people are already used to accessing Facebook and Google on the desktop anyway. Preventing people from downloading any app that supports any business that harvests user data, including Facebook, which includes WhatsApp and Instagram, Google, Uber, Amazon, and many of the most popular apps ever created could not only make the App Store inhospitable or even downright user hostile, but it could open Apple up to antitrust investigations. Remember the great Google Voice Pocket veto scandal of '09? Apple as a company also has a consistent policy of staying as engaged as possible with problematic entities and areas, because that's how Apple thinks it can best influence, advocate, and push for change. That's true in China, and that's true with Google and with Facebook. But real talk, I have no idea how tough a policy like that would be to enforce at the system level. Learning about this kind of stuff, about the possibilities of coding and algorithms and neural networks and machine learning and what they can and can't do, that's exactly where Brilliant comes in. In just 5 minutes a day, each Brilliant problem provides you with the context and framework that you need to tackle it, so that you learn the concepts by applying them. If you like the daily problem, then there's more like it in the quiz, so that you can explore the concepts in great detail and develop your framework. If you are confused and need more guidance, you can join the community and discuss the problems. And that's your doorway to learning everything. Every day. So what are you waiting for? Go to brilliant.org/vector and finish your day a little smarter every day. Thanks, Brilliant, and thanks to all of you who support the show. What about Apple and Google Search? What about Apple and China? What about Apple and cross-platform services? What about Apple and App Store app abuses? Those aren't just valid questions, they're critical ones. They're the kinds of questions that, when any company champions privacy, have to be asked for that company to become more than just a champion, but an example, an agent for change. At least that's what I think. Now I'm turning it over to you. Hit like, hit subscribe, it really helps out the channel, and then hit up the comments below and let me know. And thank you so much for watching.